A child hums a simple melody in the hollow quiet of an empty hallway, the tune floating gently through the air like a memory not yet made. 40 years later, a soldier older now, hands trembling, hears that same melody echo through a radio. He breaks down in tears. No words, no context, just notes. What is it about this arrangement of sound, this ethereal pattern of vibrations in the air, that can so deeply unravel us? Music doesn't feed us. It doesn't shelter us. It offers no tangible evolutionary advantage, and yet it's universal, found in every culture, every era, across all boundaries of language and geography. More than that, it connects us. A lullaby sung in a rural village in Africa might evoke the same soothing response as one sung in Iceland. A sad chord progression in a Japanese folk song can evoke tears in a listener who doesn't understand a single word. Why, in the late 1990s, a catchy idea exploded into public consciousness: the Mozart effect. Listening to classical music, some claimed, could make you smarter. Parents began piping Mozart into nurseries. CDs promised cognitive enhancement. The science didn't hold up under scrutiny. The effect was overstated, if not altogether misrepresented. But beneath the media frenzy lay a deeper, more fascinating truth. Music does change the brain, not just in vague ways, but in real time. As we listen, music lights up neural circuits with surprising speed and precision, like fireworks igniting across the cerebral landscape. What makes this more remarkable is that music doesn't light up one area of the brain. It lights up many more than any other known human activity. Motor regions, auditory processing centers, memory pathways, emotion circuits, even parts associated with language, attention, and movement all become active. Why would the brain respond so intensely to something so abstract? This contradiction lies at the heart of music's mystery. Unlike food or sex or shelter needs, rooted in survival, music has no obvious biological imperative, and yet it can move us to tears, drive us to dance, inspire us to rebel, or lull us into peace. It can trigger memories we thought lost, evoke feelings we didn't know we had. How can air vibrating at certain frequencies, nothing more than pressure waves, become something that grips the soul? Neuroscientists are beginning to peer into this question with tools like fMRI and EEG, mapping the symphony of activity that occurs when we listen to or create music. What they've found is extraordinary. Music recruits a neural network that spans the entire brain, forming bridges between regions that often operate separately. The same structures that interpret language, regulate emotion, plan motion, and recall memory all fire in a coherent pattern. In this way, music doesn't merely reflect our emotional state, shapes it. It synchronizes us, internally and even externally, with others. Could it be that in music's strange, non-linear logic, we are glimpsing the architecture of consciousness itself? This is not just a poetic musing. It's a live question in the world of neuroscience and philosophy. How does something as intangible as a melody translate into the visceral experience of being alive, of feeling? Could music, this ineffable, irrational art, be offering us a map to the hidden territories of the mind? 40,000 years ago, long before the first clay tablet was etched with symbols or the earliest known stories were passed down around firelit caves, a human being lifted a hollowed vulture bone to their lips and blew. The sound that emerged wasn't speech. It wasn't even what we'd recognize as music today, but it was deliberate, tonal, emotional, primitive melody, and with it, the birth of something more ancient than words. These flutes, carved with care, and still resonant with human intention, are older than any known writing system. They are evidence that before we spoke, we sang. Long before structured language could parse the world into nouns and verbs, music existed as a primal form of communication. It carried emotion, urgency, comfort, warning, cohesion. It was not art for art's sake. It was survival. Charles Darwin, among others, theorized that music may have preceded language in our evolutionary history, not as a luxury, but as a necessity. In his Descent of Man, Darwin speculated that early human ancestors used music-like vocalizations to attract mates, bond in groups, and coordinate action. The idea is gaining renewed traction today among anthropologists and neuroscientists. Music, in this view, was a social glue, a binding force that helped our ancestors hunt together, care for offspring, and mourn their dead. Rhythm could synchronize movements during work or migration. Pitch and tone conveyed emotion long before structured syntax evolved. Music wasn't a byproduct of language, it was its ancestor. A proto-language that encoded meaning in vibration, not vocabulary, this deep. Pre-verbal connection is still visible today, especially in infants. Long before they can understand or produce language, babies respond to musical cues. A lullaby can soothe a crying newborn more effectively than spoken reassurance. Rhythmic bouncing elicits smiles and cooing. Neuroscientific studies show that infants are biologically attuned to changes in pitch, tempo, and tone. They recognize the emotional content of music before they grasp the semantic content of speech. Even in utero, babies begin to recognize and respond to recurring melodic patterns. In essence, music is their first language, the original operating system of the human brain. This ancient channel remains open in ways that modern science is only beginning to understand. In hospitals and clinics around the world, music is being used not just for comfort, but as a critical therapeutic tool. In stroke patients who have lost the ability to speak, a condition called aphasia, singing is being used to rewire the brain. Known as melodic intonation therapy, this approach trains patients to sing their thoughts when they cannot say them. Somehow, music can bypass damaged language centers and activate alternative neural circuits, often restoring speech where other treatments fail. This is not simply a workaround. It's a demonstration that music taps into neural pathways that run deeper than language itself. Nowhere is this more poignantly visible than in patients with Alzheimer's disease. Many no longer recognize the faces of their loved ones. Words slip away, connections fray. But play them a familiar song from their youth, and something astonishing happens. Their eyes light up, their mouths move, they sing, the melodies seem to awaken buried memories, threading together pieces of a self that otherwise seems fragmented. It's not that the music brings back the past, it resurrects a sense of presence, of identity, however fleeting. This response isn't anecdotal, it's backed by growing research showing that music accesses memory networks that remain intact longer than other brain regions affected by neurodegenerative disease. The implications are profound. In a world grappling with the fallout of trauma, neurodegeneration, and mental health crises, music is increasingly being recognized as more than entertainment or cultural artifact. For those suffering from PTSD, for instance, music therapy is being explored as a non-verbal way to process and release buried emotional pain. For patients with Parkinson's, rhythm-based interventions are improving gait and motor coordination. In autistic individuals, music is helping facilitate emotional expression and social bonding. These aren't fringe practices, they are part of a growing body of therapeutic research redefining music's role in medicine and neuroscience. The truth emerging is both startling and intuitive. Music is not a byproduct of culture. It is not a passive pleasure or an evolutionary accident. It is a core function of the human brain, a hidden operating system that predates language and persists even when language fails. It is embedded in our neural architecture, shaping how we move, feel, remember, and relate. It is how we first knew each other, how we first knew ourselves. In forgetting this, in relegating music to the background, we may have lost a vital key to understanding not just emotion or memory, but consciousness itself. In a quiet, darkened room, humming with machines, a subject lies still inside the narrow tunnel of an fMRI scanner. Electrodes are gently fastened to their scalp, recording the tiniest sparks of electrical activity as a melody begins to play through headphones. As the music swells, so does the brain. Regions light up in tandem like a symphony unfolding across cortical and subcortical networks. What scientists are seeing isn't just the brain hearing music, it's embodying it. The auditory cortex decodes the basic structure of sound, pitch, tempo, volume, but almost instantly, the motor cortex begins to stir, as if the body is preparing to move, even in stillness. The limbic system, seat of emotion, ignites in response to the rising tension and sweetness of melody. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, the brain's prediction engine, begins calculating what might come next, anticipating resolution, surprise, or harmony. These aren't isolated reactions. They're simultaneous, layered, and recursive. Music, it turns out, doesn't travel through the brain like a passenger. It floods it, becoming part of its architecture in real time. This astonishing coordination has led to a central discovery in modern neuroscience. Music hijacks the brain's prediction system. We are not passive listeners. Our brains are constantly modeling what comes next, and in music, that process becomes deeply rewarding. A rising melody teases a fall. A dissonant chord begs for resolution. These patterns mimic emotional extension and release, conflict and closure, so precisely that it's as if music is storytelling without words, emotion encoded into sound, and we don't just listen to the story, we feel it unfold. Our reward systems light up when the music resolves, in expected or surprising ways. This feedback loop of prediction and satisfaction, of uncertainty and relief, explains why a particular chord progression can make us cry, or why a beat drop can make us euphoric. But with this insight comes a subtle, disquieting dilemma. If music manipulates our brains through these predictive pathways, if it stirs our emotions not by accident but by design, where does authenticity begin? Is the beauty we feel truly ours, or is it simply the result of our neural circuitry being expertly played like an instrument? When a national anthem brings tears to our eyes, is it patriotism or conditioning? When a commercial jingle leaves us smiling, is that joy or manipulation? Music is everywhere used to rally armies, to sell soda, to lull children to sleep, to trigger nostalgia for products we don't need. It becomes hard to separate sincere emotional resonance from calculated psychological targeting. Is this emotional manipulation, or is it something more profound? A shared emotional architecture we're all tuned into, whether we choose to be or not. The paradox is haunting. Music can be weaponized or healing. It can be commercial or sacred. But in every form, It bypasses our rational defenses and goes straight to the core. The question that now emerges with full force is this: are we wired to be moved by music, passively shaped by its patterns across evolution? Or more provocatively, did music wire us? Did our brain's emotional systems, our capacity for empathy, even our sense of time and memory, evolve under the influence of this ancient sonic force? Music, far from being decoration, may be the very medium through which consciousness learned to structure feeling, connection, and self. What we once thought of as entertainment may be the most primal expression of what it means to be human. Across continents and centuries, without needing a shared tongue or text, certain musical patterns seem to provoke the same emotional responses. A major chord feels bright, full of warmth and resolution. A minor chord feels darker, tinged with melancholy. What's startling is that these associations often hold true even outside the cultural boundaries of Western music. Listeners in isolated communities with no exposure to classical harmony still report similar feelings when hearing certain tonal structures. But why? Is this universal emotional response a product of deep-seated biology, our nervous systems, responding to acoustic phenomena in a predictable way? Or have centuries of cultural storytelling subtly trained our brains to link these sounds with specific moods? It's a question that splits psychologists, musicologists, and neuroscientists alike. If our emotional reactions to music are learned, then they're fragile, dependent on context, conditioning, history. If they're innate, then they may be one of the few emotional constants shared across humanity. To understand music's place in evolution, researchers have looked beyond our species. Birds sing, whales emit haunting, tonal moans that evolve into complex, repeating phrases. Some primates use rhythm-like vocalizations in courtship or conflict, but none compose with the deliberate architecture that humans do. None build symphonies or string quartets or lo-fi beats for late-night study sessions. The leap from sound to music, structured, emotional, intentional, is uniquely human. Why? One theory posits that music emerged as a side effect of other evolved traits: language, motor coordination, social bonding. But perhaps the inverse is true. Perhaps music came first, shaping those very traits. And then there are studies, controversial, debated, suggesting that speakers of tonal languages like Mandarin or Yoruba have better pitch perception. Even when listening to non-linguistic sounds, does the way we speak reshape how we hear? Or do certain brains come more finely tuned to the nuances of tone, creating a feedback loop between music, language, and culture? This is where the paradox deepens. Music, at its core, is pure math: vibrations per second, harmonic ratios, spatial intervals in time. It is physics rendered audible. And yet, in the mind, it becomes something entirely different. A single note can become a memory. A sequence of chords can evoke an entire era, a lost relationship, a personal rebirth. How does a mathematical formula become grief? How can an invisible vibration resurrect someone we've lost? During World War II, jazz was labeled degenerate music by the Nazi regime. It was banned, condemned, erased from the public sphere. And still, it flourished underground, not just as rebellion, but as identity. For many, jazz was more than notes. It was a way to remember who they were, a sonic affirmation of freedom and humanity. In trying to suppress it, the regime revealed its deeper power. Music, more than almost any force, resists erasure. It restores personhood in the face of dehumanization. This leads to a provocative question. Can music shape identity as deeply as language or religion? We define ourselves by the stories we tell, the beliefs we hold, but also by the music we love. The songs we carry become shorthand for who we are, for where we've been. Now, emerging technologies are blurring the lines even further. Neural decoding models are beginning to reconstruct music from thought alone. Scientists can now use brain scans to approximate the melody a person is imagining. A process that seems almost mystical, like listening to the mind's private radio station. But this raises unsettling new tensions. If machines can listen to what we hear inside our own heads, where does the boundary of self end? If a silent song in the mind can be made audible, is that thought or data, art or signal? As these questions multiply, one thing becomes clear. Music is not passive. It does not sit in the background of human experience. It is integral, insistent, alive. It shapes culture, identity, resistance, and memory. It bridges instinct and invention, biology, and belief. And in its silences, it plays inside our minds long after the sound fades. It becomes the most paradoxical force of all, a soundtrack to the self that no one else can hear, yet which shapes us more deeply than almost anything we can say. In 2022, a sweeping meta-study examining decades of neuroscience research delivered a quietly revolutionary insight. Music doesn't just reflect what we feel, it constructs. It does not merely mirror our emotional states, it engineers them. By aligning our brainwaves and physiological rhythms, music can induce emotional and bodily states we were not previously experiencing. A slow tempo can decelerate our heartbeat, calm our breathing, lower our cortisol levels. A driving rhythm can do the opposite, invigorate, agitate, rouse. In essence, music becomes an external force that modulates the internal machinery of the self. This is not metaphor, it's measurable biology. When neuroscientists placed groups of people in scanning environments and had them sing together, they found something astonishing. Not only did heart rates and breathing patterns begin to sync, but so did neural oscillations, brainwave rhythms began to align. What music creates is not just shared sound, but shared physiological and neurological states. A kind of measurable harmony, not just between sounds, but between people. The twist buried in this research is profound. For centuries, we've thought of music as something the brain produces, a byproduct of culture, creativity, or evolved cognition. But what if we've misunderstood its role entirely? The data now suggests that music is not just the result of brain activity. It is a tool the brain uses to regulate itself. It's an active agent in our emotional and neurological lives. When we put on a sad song and feel comforted, or blast an energetic anthem to push through exhaustion, we aren't merely indulging in mood matching, we are applying a form of neurological self-mastery. Music offers the brain a kind of emotional architecture it can inhabit, one more stable and more expressive than words. This means music isn't reactive, it's generative. Our brains don't passively receive music like radio waves. They reshape themselves in response to it. Synapses fire in new patterns. Hormones adjust. Memory pathways activate or are restructured. Music becomes a form of neuroplasticity in motion. This realization reframes music not just as art, but as architecture, as one of the builders of the conscious mind. In this light, music may not simply be a beautiful byproduct of human intelligence, a cultural flourish. It may have been there all along, helping to structure the mind itself. Every beat, every melody, every harmonized breath could be part of how consciousness learns to feel, to share, to become coherent. What we once thought of as soundtrack is actually scaffolding. Music, then, is not merely something we do, it is part of how we are. Not just a reflection of what it means to be human, but a shaper of that meaning from the inside out today. After decades of increasingly sophisticated research, neuroscience has reached a rare point of clarity. Music is not an ancillary pleasure or decorative noise. It is a biological force with tangible, measurable effects on the human brain. We now know that music directly impacts memory, emotion, and even physical recovery. In clinical settings across the world, music therapy is being deployed not as entertainment, but as medicine. Stroke patients use rhythmic entrainment to relearn walking. Children with autism use melody to develop language and social cues. In memory care units, Alzheimer's patients experience fleeting moments of clarity and connection through songs. From their youth, in prisons, structured musical programs are reducing aggression and improving empathy. In palliative care, music is easing pain and anxiety where drugs fall short. These aren't fringe interventions, they are evidence-based protocols with real neurological and psychological outcomes, increasingly integrated into modern medical practice. What's emerged is a scientific consensus grounded in decades of neuroimaging, biochemical tracking, and behavioral analysis. Music doesn't just stimulate isolated parts of the brain, it synchronizes them. It facilitates communication between the auditory cortex, motor cortex, limbic system, and prefrontal regions, acting as a conductor that unites emotional, physical, and cognitive systems. It enhances the release of neurochemicals like dopamine, associated with reward and motivation, and oxytocin linked to trust and bonding, creating a neurochemical cocktail that reinforces connection, joy, and healing. It reduces cortisol levels, lowering stress, and has been shown to blunt the perception of pain through distraction, expectation, and emotional modulation. In speech therapy, melodic intonation bypasses damaged linguistic pathways, engaging music-driven neural circuits to recover lost language abilities. In short, music is not just therapy, it is a diagnostic and healing tool that works through the same mechanisms that govern consciousness itself. In fact, many neuroscientists now regard music as a kind of keyhole through which we can glimpse the architecture of consciousness, because music activates so many disparate brain regions in concert. It offers researchers a unique window into how these regions interact, how emotion, memory, prediction, movement, and awareness are coordinated into the unified experience of being a person. Music, in this light, is not just therapeutic, is revelatory. It helps us understand how the mind weaves itself together from rhythm, expectation, and effect. As a result, it's increasingly difficult to argue that the arts are extra. They are not extracurricular. They are cognitive infrastructure. Music education, far from a luxury, may be training the brain in fundamental capacities: empathy, timing, focus, communication that underpin all human learning and connection. And so we are left with an urgent question, not just scientific but cultural. What happens when a society devalues music? When schools cut it from curricula? When budgets eliminate community programs? When cultural support fades, are we inadvertently dismantling part of what makes us human? Are we silencing not just songs, but a tool for self-regulation, healing, and identity? If, as neuroscience suggests, we are the instruments through which music passes minds tuned to turn, vibration into meaning, then losing music is not just a loss of sound. It is a loss of structure, of memory, of coherence, of empathy. Music doesn't just belong to us. It is us, to mute. It is to mute something essential within ourselves. In a dimly lit concert hall, a blind pianist sits quietly at the bench, his hands resting gently on the keys. There is no sheet music, no prelude, just a breath, and then, without cue, the music begins. What unfolds is not a performance in the traditional sense, but something closer to transmission. He improvises, not from memory, not from theory, but from a place neither he nor anyone watching can fully explain. The melody rises with impossible tenderness, dips into melancholy, then lifts again with a kind of fierce joy. As his fingers dance, it becomes clear that this is more than technique, it is something being channeled. The audience listens in, awe not just to the sound, but to the sensation of witnessing music being born in real time. Afterward, asked where it came from, the pianist simply says, "I don't know, I just listen." It's in this mystery that the final question blooms. Music is not bound by borders or beliefs. It asks nothing of us, no translation, no ideology, only that we feel it. A lullaby in the Amazon stirs the same tenderness as one in Siberia. A funeral hymn in Ghana may echo the sadness of a requiem in Vienna. Music slips beneath language. Under culture, beyond dogma, it resonates. Not just acoustically, but emotionally, neurologically. It doesn't tell us what to feel, it is the feeling. And in that resonance, something ancient and honest emerges. A shared humanity that predates words and outlasts explanation. So we are left with a quiet, wondrous question. If music connects us across time, culture, and even states of consciousness, when memory fades, when speech fails, when pain isolates, could it be the most honest thing we know? Not because it is always beautiful or simple, but because it tells the truth of feeling without the disguise of language. It reveals us to ourselves. We think we listen to music, but maybe music listens to us, shaping the contours of what we call the self. And in the end, as Oliver Sacks once wrote, music can pierce the heart directly. It needs no mediation. It reaches us with no intermediaries, no permission needed. It is memory without image, love without name, grief without story. It is the raw data of being alive. So perhaps the brain is the orchestra, networks of neurons tuned to respond and adapt. But the question remains, who or what is the conductor? What is this force that moves through us, rearranges us, binds us? Maybe we'll never name it. Maybe it doesn't need a name. Because perhaps, in the most fundamental way, we don't just hear music, we are music. And every heartbeat, every breath, is a silent rhythm waiting to be remembered.